Let me first say, sort of beyond my general thanks, thank you, Steve. You pronounced my name correctly. And thank you to Rai Cabarrus for the invitation. Discussions like these are so critical. And I almost feel like I don't need to say anything after the past speaker, because so much of what he says underpins the points that I wanted to raise around social justice and our place in that. That said, I never let a mic go unused. So we're in fairly tumultuous times, my first understatement of the day, and uncertain. And I hearken back to, sort of the impact really close after the election, and people who are walking around sort of in a daze. And I still feel that there's a little bit of that still. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of the ACLU in the hope that that history will, and as it does me, inspire you some. And we've been here before in some way or shape or way. Our democracy is a thing in being. It was not perfect beginning, although we like to refer to the beauty and the glory of the dream. I think we all look at what it can be, and that's what inspires us. We should not be discouraged by the fact that we're not there yet. The shock that it really does matter if you vote. It does matter that you have a conversation and critically thought through arguments, as opposed to the visceral impact of a scree on Twitter or some real zing on Facebook that is the charge of the moment. That those things really do matter. But if we look at fundamental principles, what I would ask is, do we really believe in the core principles of our democracy? Not the question, which I think many people will say no to, are we there? That's not the question, but are those principles valuable? Are they worth fighting for? Do we believe in the principle of free speech and protest? The exercise of religion, and that exercise freely. In due process, in equality before the law, in freedom from unlawful searches and seizures, the right to privacy. Are those things that we really believe in? I think that's where we start our discussion. And if they are, the next question, which I think the hard question and the one that we have to be accountable about, is what will we do to preserve those fundamental principles? Because this constitutional democracy of ours is we the people. We are the government. And so when we spend time talking about the government and denigrating it as not worth our while and it's only political, we have resigned our really critical place in the democracy. And so we might be surprised, but we're no less accountable. And so that's the charge that I want you to keep in mind. And just a little bit of history. The ACLU came into being almost 100 years ago in 1920 as a organized response in part to the madness and anti-Bolshevik overextension of government misconduct, shall we say, in fear of that outreach, the Red Scare. And so we had the Alien and Sedition Act, the surrender, again, in fear of constitutional principles, the thought that questions of freedom and privacy, of the right of collective action as unions could take a back seat because the bigger thing was security. Sound a little familiar? And so it's in that context that the ACLU came into being. And nearly 100 years later, what we have is a period of extreme fear and anxiety, economic uncertainty, issue as to what is our place in the world. Are we really number one? And not the Red Scare, I don't know what color we'll call it, but the scare of terrorism. And the push is to say, let's deal with constitutional issues later, security first, or your constitutional rights should not interfere with my security, that kind of notion. And we are no less engaged as an organization, the ACLU. So whether it is in opposition to the big protective wall to our southern border, the Muslim ban, threats increasingly to the freedom of press. Maybe it's not a good thing that people report freely, because it brings questions to the government. Wouldn't we all be better if the press were somewhat silenced? No. Even extending into torture, maybe it's not a bad thing. It works. Those kinds of notions. So again, these are previously trod ground for us at the ACLU, and so these are to some degree old battles that we continue to fight. It's also the leadership that we have in our organization. So I'll just take a half a minute to speak to the National Executive Director's, Anthony Romera's, very early challenge to the present administration to really walk through the litany of what was promised during the campaign and to take that as true and to, as I say, put forth the immediate challenge, which is to say, we'll see you in court. That was for me very, very heartening. It made it much easier for me to get up the next day and walk through what I see as a number of obstacles and a number of battles. And I just share that as perhaps something that will equally inspire you. And it's not just in court, it's in the streets. We've seen some of that in place already. And then the other part of that national effort was just mobilizing and organizing members. And I hope some of you are members here. We certainly have seen a huge increase in membership in recent months. But to take it to the streets, to speak to legislatures, to demonstrate, to organize not only directly to legislatures, but to undertake what I think was an effective communication campaign as well. The end result of that, as we all know, is that the first round of ban that was ultimately stayed across the nation. Different results and different ones, but ultimately that's where we stand. Second effort, similar result. And that is, in my view, democracy in action. People understanding their rights against what in the moment of darkness and despair might have seemed an insurmountable obstacle, but moving forward on those fundamental constitutional principles and joining together as we the people and making a difference. A bill that is currently being debated, HB 63, which is intended to, I think, encourage is the word used in the statute, compliance with a ban on sanctuary cities. And so municipalities, government bodies that are seen not to comport with the ban against sanctuary cities, and that is to say who are not immediately turning over immigrant detainees to ICE, are subject to significant financial penalties. That's one part of the bill. The other portion, if anything more egregious, is that it takes away, or rather substantially restricts, the right to post bail. So an immigrant is presumed not a flight risk, essentially. And so there is a rebuttable presumption, which means that rather than the government proving that there is a risk, it is then on the person who's only been arrested to prove, through hurdles yet to be determined, that they're eligible for bail. So another obstacle. So that's a bit of work that we're doing. Voting rights for us is under the rubric of racial justice, as is immigration, by the way. And you may be fairly well acquainted with the pre-election litigation about access to the franchise, the right for same-day registration, pre-registration, provisional, out-of-district, as well as, importantly, early voting options. We brought that suit successfully. You saw the backlash against that, the continuing fight, not only the opposition in court from the legislature, but post-election, the numerous allegations about voter fraud and the creative efforts to find it where it didn't exist. Thanks for your time.